Go again. This is our third in the review of the respiratory system as simple as possible, awkwardly simple anatomy physiology. We talked about the air passages. We talked about the changing air pressures that allow inhalation, exhalation. Now let's say something about the respiratory gases and how they move through the blood. And this is a lot of review in the sense that down here we're going to talk about how oxygen is carried through the circulatory system, then how carbon dioxide. And we're going to revisit a lot of very familiar numbers. Here we go. Let's say this awkward looking thing right here is a red blood cell. Well, oxygen can be carried inside the plasma of the blood, but only about 2% of the oxygen that's carried in the blood is carried as dissolved in the plasma. Of the water-based plasma, the warm water-based plasma is not very good for dissolving oxygen. However, if oxygen diffuses into a red blood cell, it can combine with hemoglobin and make oxyhemoglobin. Oxyhemoglobin is how approximately 98% of the oxygen is carried through the circulatory system. Now, this, of course, is what's happening near the lungs, where you're loading the oxygen onto the hemoglobin and dissolving the oxygen into the plasma. Next to the hard-working cells, you would just reverse all this. The oxygen would come out of the plasma and diffuse over towards the interstitial fluid and the hard-working cells, and the oxyhemoglobin would dissociate, unload the oxygen, which would then diffuse out of the red blood cell into the plasma and over towards the interstitial fluid. So that's simple right there. Carbon dioxide, a bit more complex. And so here we go. Carbon dioxide next to the hard-working cells is in abundance, and so therefore carbon dioxide could dissolve directly into the blood plasma. But again, it's warm water, and warm water doesn't dissolve gases very well. But carbon dioxide does dissolve better than oxygen does inside the plasma. So approximately 7% of the carbon dioxide that's carried through the blood is dissolved directly into the plasma. Now, approximately 20 to 23% of the carbon dioxide moves into the red blood cell, loads onto the hemoglobin, and makes carbamine hemoglobin. The carbamine hemoglobin represents about 20%, 23% of the oxygen that's being carried through the circulatory system. It turns out, by the way, that when carbon dioxide loads onto hemoglobin, it makes the hemoglobin slightly acidic, and the acidic hemoglobin tends to bump off any oxygen that tends to be there. It's not complete, but it's part of the general story. All right. Another possibility for the hemoglobin, by the way, is that it can absorb a hydrogen ion that was also part of the carbon dioxide story. But let's back up on that. Carbon dioxide can diffuse from the plasma into the red blood cell, and inside the red blood cell, it can combine with water. There is an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase that speeds this process up, and you make this stuff right here, which is called carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is the stuff that's found inside carbonated drinks, like Coca-Cola. It makes it acidic, it makes it bubble and such. Well, the carbonic anhydrase speeds up the process of carbon dioxide and water coming together. And the that's carbamine hemoglobin right there. And the carbonic acid right here can dissociate into a hydrogen ion, H+, and the bicarbonate ion, which is -1. The hydrogen ion now has the opportunity to step onto a hemoglobin and make that acidic hemoglobin. As we mentioned before, when carbon dioxide and H+ combined with hemoglobin, it makes it less likely that oxygen can remain on that hemoglobin, so it does help the unloading of oxygen. All right, so the carbon dioxide right here has been hidden, but now it's found there. And it turns out that it's not going to stay inside the red blood cell. Instead, this bicarbonate right here can diffuse out of the red blood cell and into the plasma. And approximately 70% of the carbon dioxide that's carried through your circulatory system is carried as bicarbonate dissolved inside the plasma. However, there's something unusual that happens right here, and that is for this negatively charged ion, this anion, to leave the red blood cell, there needs to be a kind of a replacement for that negative charge. And chlorine tends to move in as bicarbonate moves out. So this is called a chlorine shift, and it's particularly important just to keep the red blood cell from getting an overall positive or negative charge. By the way, when you get to the respiratory system and you're getting close to the alveoli, all these processes we're talking about right here can reverse themselves. The bicarbonate can diffuse into the red blood cell. The chlorine moves out. The bicarbonate can recombine with the hydrogen ion that's released from the hemoglobin. It forms carbonic acid. The carbonic acid can dissociate into water and carbon dioxide, and the carbon dioxide can diffuse out of the red blood cell over towards the alveoli and be released. Likewise, the carbamine hemoglobin right here can dissociate, that is, the hemoglobin can let go, and then the hemoglobin is free to pick up some oxygen, and the carbon dioxide is free to diffuse outside the cell and then into the alveoli. And of course, that carbon dioxide that was always dissolved inside the plasma now has the opportunity to diffuse out of the plasma and into the airspace. Now, as far as visualizing this on a larger scale, well, let's just talk about the oxygen moving around here. Let this represent the respiratory system right here, upper respiratory tract, that's a nose. Down here, the alveoli. Over here, the hard-working cells inside the body. Here's the general storyline. The left side of the heart pumps blood towards these systemic cells out here. The blood leaving the left side of the heart has a relatively high amount of oxygen. That's used 95 as a representation of that. This high level of oxygen right here, when compared to the low level of oxygen found inside the hard-working cells, allows the oxyhemoglobin here to dissociate and for the oxygen to diffuse from higher concentration to lower concentration. And it's diffusion that allows this to happen. So it goes from high to low, but only until it reaches equilibrium, which is around 40 units now. So now the blood coming around the corner right here isn't completely deoxygenated. It just has less oxygen in it than it had before. This is the blood that you find in the systemic veins and in the right side of the heart and in the pulmonary trunk, pulmonary arteries, passing by the alveoli. When it passes by the alveoli, the oxygen level inside, I hope I said that right, the oxygen level inside the venous blood right here is relatively low compared to the oxygen level inside the alveolar air. The alveolar air is approximately, in units, about 104. It's about 13% oxygen. Because 104 is greater than 40, as this blood, deoxygenated blood, so to speak, comes by the airspace, the oxygen diffuses from higher concentration to lower concentration. You kind of top this thing off, and now the blood is coming around with approximately 104 units of oxygen inside. This is the blood that's going to head towards the left side of the heart and then exit at 95. Now, the strangeness of the numbers here is because of something that we didn't say a whole lot about, and that is there are systemic arteries that take oxygenated blood to the lungs, to the stroma of the lungs, to the part of the lungs not directly associated with alveoli. Those tissues are systemic and they have to be kept alive. So, this blood right here is oxygenated. It goes through systemic capillaries of the stroma of the lungs, and then it comes back through systemic veins towards the left side of the heart. But rather than plugging in to the right side as other systemic veins do, this one plugs in to the pulmonary veins. It's just one of those little oddities. Therefore, you're having this deoxygenated blood mixing with this oxygenated blood, and that explains why the oxygen that's coming out of the left ventricle is slightly lower than the oxygen level of the blood going into the heading towards the heart, away from the lungs right there. So a little oddity right there. Okay, another oddity right here. It turns out that the oxygen level inside the alveolar air is approximately 13%. The oxygen level in the air around you is about 20 to 21%. The reason why this is lower in oxygen is because with every breath, there's always a little bit of mixing of the new breath in with the old air that didn't get pushed out. There's something called residual volume down here. The air that's left behind after an exhalation. The air that's in those pipes that didn't collapse. And that's not fresh air. So it wouldn't be 21% oxygen. It would be closer to 13% oxygen. So again, there is a mixing of the air in and out right here, and that's why this number isn't as high as atmospheric is. Let's finish this thing off real quickly here by talking about the carbon dioxide and how it does the job. Okay, let's start over here with the hard-working cells. These hard-working cells are creating carbon dioxide. The level of carbon dioxide in this hard-working cell is about 45 units, compared to this so-called fresh oxygenated blood that has only about 40 units of carbon dioxide in it. As this oxygenated blood, which is low in carbon dioxide, moves by these hard-working cells, the carbon dioxide will diffuse from higher concentration to lower concentration, and in essence, you load the carbon dioxide onto the blood. So the blood came in around 40 units, it comes out around 45 units, not a dramatic change. But this is the deoxygenated blood, the blood with extra carbon dioxide that's heading through the systemic veins to the right side of the heart, through the pulmonary trunk, the pulmonary arteries, now passes by the alveoli, where the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmospheric air, well, this air right here, is only around 40 units. So therefore, the carbon dioxide goes from greater concentration of carbon dioxide to lesser carbon dioxide concentration. So you pull off the top right there. What comes around the corner is blood with carbon dioxide inside, but now it's just a little bit less than it was going into the lungs. Comes around the corner right here, goes through the left side of the heart, goes in 40, comes out 40, goes here next to these hard-working cells. Again, you kind of top the thing off, comes over here, you scrape off that extra, come around the corner, top it off. So yeah, it's a strange analogy right here. Think about sort of skimming off the top and then topping it off by adding something to it, and then skimming off the top and then topping it off and adding something to it, and moving it back and forth, if those ideas make any sense. Down here, let's look at the concentration of carbon dioxide inside the alveoli. It's approximately 5% of the gas mixture down here, but in the atmospheric air, it's around 0.04%. Again, this is a more stagnant air, mustier air, so to speak, because of that residual volume and the fact that you don't completely clean out your lungs every time you inhale and exhale. Good place to stop.